Let's talk then to our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert, who joins us now. So, Doug, Joe Biden favours a ceasefire. Hardly strong words, are they?
No, he expressed support for a ceasefire, which is semantically and in diplomatic jargon very different from calling for a ceasefire. Look, Joe Biden has remained extremely reticent, and perhaps that's even putting it mildly, to criticize Israel in any shape or form. And he's following a pattern that we've seen with almost all U.S. presidents in recent years, whether Republican or Democrat, and to extend that a broader trend among world leaders, reticent to criticize Israel. Now, Israel is the recipient of nearly $4 billion in U.S. aid per year, some of that going, obviously, to weapons for its military. And short of cutting off part or all of that aid, the aid or the arms to Israel from the United States, don't hold your breath, because that's not going to happen. The U.S. essentially doesn't have that much leverage, and that might sound a little strange, given the fact that the U.S. is seen as sort of the last arbiter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But in this case, up against Benjamin Netanyahu, who was absolutely determined, because he said it in his own words, to carry out as long as it takes with full force his campaign to basically degrade the military capacity of Hamas. Up against that type of leader in Israel, Joe Biden, there's very little he can do, and he perhaps doesn't want to risk looking like a weak, impotent president whose calls fall on deaf ears if he were to call for an immediate ceasefire. But I'll reiterate, Stuart, that he is up against a shifting, as we've been talking about, shifting sentiment in the U.S. Congress. A group of 28 Democratic lawmakers in the Senate basically did use the language that Joe Biden hasn't used by calling for an immediate ceasefire. What we have seen, meanwhile, in the past couple of days is the Biden administration giving the final approval to a sale of $735 million in arms to Israel's military. Now, that was a sale that had been signaled to Congress early in May, but it was finally approved. So what we really see is still a very lopsided from the United States when it comes to Israel. And that's the way forward for the Biden administration for now. No signs of a real shift there.
Doug, we've got EU foreign ministers meeting today. Obviously, that includes France. Is there anything France can do?
Yeah, look, well, this is interesting because the EU itself is so hopelessly divided on the issue, with a lot of the Eastern members, lending their support of Israel, and some of the other more Western European members, including Ireland, Belgium, Sweden, Luxembourg, they're all more critical of Israel. So given these divisions, France is sort of seen as perhaps the most prominent voice. And that's not saying much, because the EU in general doesn't weigh in very heavily in any calculation of resolving this conflict. But France is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. France's President Emmanuel Macron did meet yesterday with a central, pivotal mediator in the conflict, Egypt. Egypt's President al-Sisi, who is one of the rare countries that has channels open to both Israel and to Hamas in Gaza. So both of them meeting together. So at least, on the visibility front, on the image front, Macron is making a good show of being involved in this conflict. But look, the fact of the matter is Europe and France, more specifically, do not have much say in what Israel or what Hamas are going to do. They could weigh in from the sidelines symbolically, and perhaps what illustrates that best is, last Thursday, when Emmanuel Macron spoke to Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas on the phone. That same day, he wanted to speak to Benjamin Netanyahu, but Netanyahu's office said that the prime minister had no time that day for a phone call with the French president. They did end up speaking the following day on Friday. Of course, Netanyahu did make time for Joe Biden, but it does show that Emmanuel Macron just doesn't carry the same clout, even though he may be the most prominent EU member in sort of trying to weigh in on this conflict. France is still small fry from the Israeli perspective, and Benjamin Netanyahu certainly isn't going to take any marching orders from Emmanuel Macron.
Doug, thanks very much. Doug Herbert, international affairs commentator, with us here on France 34.